All righty, I've got 3:30, so we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is the first budget development workshop of 23-24, and we're going to kick it off with Brandy.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Give the county administrator a second here to get hooked up, and I'll kick us off. So this is our first budget development workshop of the 23-24 budget season. What we're going to be talking about today, a lot of it is high-level conceptual. We have some outstanding budget requests as well as our certification of values, and so we're just trying to get some feedback from the board about some initiatives we have for next year at this time. So one thing that we are looking at is to be able to provide a suitable COLA for all of our county personnel. And this is not just our Board of County Commission personnel, these are all of our constitutional officers as well. We have some officers that are either partially funded by state agencies or their budget is approved through a state agency, and there's some different things going on at the state level. We recognize that 2 years ago we did a pretty drastic salary adjustment for all our people, and I think the state is just now playing catch up, and so we need to look at what the consequences of the different rates of COLA are. We've identified a need to place an engine company in the eastern portion of the county, as well as implement the step pay plan in fire rescue. The sheriff's office has requested to add some additional positions, and I would like to say at this point that this presentation went out Wednesday, and we've already had a couple changes and some new information, some revised requests, and so when we get to those parts, I will let you know that this is now 9 positions. It is 6 certified law enforcement positions, 2 dispatchers, and 1 bailiff. As you know, we are mandated to provide or to go with whatever the FRS rate is each year. I looked earlier today and that bill has not been signed, but it's pretty much locked in. It's with the governor, and it's looking to be about a 3% increase across all the different classes of FRS employees, as well as our mandated annual Medicare cost share. In addition to that, the BOCC funds a lot of agencies. A lot of them, most of them, with their requests this year have requested additional support. And so we're seeing that every agency is facing the same inflationary pressure that we are, and a lot of the funding requests have increased. We're still working through some of the nonprofits, our local senior center, and so everybody has asked for more money pretty much without exception this year. And when we do all these things, we've always got our eye on how does that impact our fund balance and our general fund. Our general fund, as you know, is our umbrella fund. It is responsible to make sure every other fund is in good shape, and when there's a situation, we can transfer general funds in order to support a fund temporarily while we make adjustments. So that is always our goal, is to keep an eye on the general fund. When we look back, well, I can reach it, but we looked back at when we implemented that compensation study with Evergreen, and we had a plan back then, and we wanted to know how that plan worked, what was different from the plan, and make sure we understood where we were before going forward. So in 21-22, we implemented the salary adjustments for all offices. We added our 6 positions for fire rescue, and then we also purchased a golf course in that year. The golf course was an unbudgeted expense at that time. We didn't know what we were getting into, when we would staff it, what we would need to buy. So it ended up being about $600,000 in 21-22 that we did not initially budget for. In 21-22, we increased our PST rate to offset some of the impact of implementing that compensation study. And so the rate is currently 9%, and that went into effect April 1st of 2022. And so we are just now to the point where we are realizing a full year at that 9%. We do have a provider or 2 that we are auditing in order to make sure that they are paying us properly, but for the most part, we've got a good year of history now of what kind of revenue that 9% is going to bring in. as well as we had increased the MSBU rate at that time as well.
Excuse me.
Was that excuse me stop?
That was excuse me.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. So at the end of last year, we burned about $250,000 in the general fund. We spent about $2 million in our revenue stabilization fund. We staffed the golf course. We purchased a lot of equipment there. And we're projecting at the end of this fiscal year that we'll burn down another 160 and spend another $1 million in our revenue stabilization fund. Incidentally, in the current year, we added 8 certified positions to the sheriff's office, and we are receiving the state funding for being a fiscally constrained county, and that is written as recurring. It went from $653,000 this year to $860,000 next year, and so we just need to watch that and be conscious, although I think we all understand that the intent of that funding was for it to be year over year. That has to get through each year and get passed and get voted on, and so we have to watch that because it's part of our sheriff's office funding, and so we need to be vigilant in the event that it ever goes away. I don't have any indications of that. I just want to put that out there that we're not guaranteed that funding year over year. So all of that means that when we look back at what we burned in the 2 years, about $400,000 in our general fund at the end of this year, and I'm projecting that we'll be at the floor of our fund balance policy. So we'll be right at 25% of our annual operating costs in our general fund. And then our revenue stabilization fund, our plan was to burn 2.3. We actually are going to spend close to $3 million, and most of that is because of the $600,000 in expenses of the golf course that were unanticipated when we adopted the 21-22 budget. Fortunately, that was offset by some federal funds that came to us that were related to the pandemic. We deposited those in our revenue stabilization fund, and we have been building on those, and then we have them earmarked for projects in the future. Ooh, this thing is touchy. So we're looking at the largest revenue sources that we have. These go into the general fund. They are our unrestricted revenues that can be spent on any general government purpose. We can buy paper with these, we can pay utility bills, and we pay salaries with these. Now, there has been a revised estimate from the property appraiser's office regarding our ad valorem, which is our very top bars up there. And so, obviously, as we get a certification of values from our property appraiser's office, we'll update these. But I do want to point out that our ad valorem, our PST, and our state revenue sharing, this is what funds your general government operations. And so, typically, everything that we collect in ad valorem each year gets turned over to our constitutional officers between the sheriff, the clerk, the supervisor of elections, tax collector, and property appraiser. So really that leaves the BOCC to exist with our PST and then our state revenue sharing as well as our departmental revenue. The good news is that these revenues are all growing. And our ad valorem growth really depends on what millage rate we end up adopting. Looking at our expense side, we have our salaries and our benefits. They're growing as well. And then our transfers to our constitutional officers. Now, constitutional officers' budgets include other things, other operating expenses, but for the most part, 90% of their budget requests are their biggest resource, which is their personnel. Biggest expense, biggest resource.
Brandy?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, Chair. May I ask Brandy a question? I just want to go back to revenue growth. Can you tell me that again about the ad valorem, the general fund, and the constitutional officers again?
I sure can.
Thank you.
So these are our unrestricted revenue sources in the general fund, and for the majority, the ad valorem funds our constitutional officers.
Okay. Thank you.
So now that we've looked at how our revenues are growing and how our expenses are growing, I like to think of them as two halves of the pie. And we really want these to be very similar size pie. We don't want anybody to have bigger than the other. And so what we're starting to see is that our expenses are growing a little faster rate than our revenue. So that leaves us with a couple options of how to address this. The first option is you increase your fees. Second option would be you cut some expenses. And the third option is to spend down your cash. Well, we just talked about our general fund balance. We're going to be at the floor there where we need to be, and we'll talk later about how most of our revenue stabilization fund money is committed. And so really option 3 for that is off the table, so that just leaves us with we've got to generate some more revenue or we've got to cut expenses. We do have some changes as well in this slide. Again, like I said, stuff is happening very fast this time of year with revised strategies and amended budget requests. And so the contract manager is definitely a position that the BOCC needs to add. This person will be responsible for managing the emergency radio system that we just procured and is already underway. We're already receiving radios and consoles and things like that, and so this person will make sure that Motorola is doing what they are supposed to be doing and what they have committed in their contract. They will be scheduling updates, keeping track of inventory, who has what radio, when things need to be repaired, when they're sent out, when they come back, and so it's a pretty complex thing for somebody that already has several tasks in their regular day to do, and so we need a dedicated person to do this. In addition to that, we committed this with our grant agency, Triumph, that we would bring somebody on to manage this contract. Public Works.
How much money did we receive from Triumph?
12.7 million. 11 million, I'm sorry, I got our match included. Well, the contract with Motorola is 12.4 million, so, okay. Public Works Director, we can ignore that because that has changed this week as well, and we'll be going a different direction. An accounts payable analyst, that's somebody to work with me to review the day-to-day transactions. And the floodplain shuffle, everybody get up. This is where you do the shuffle. Nobody take it. Okay. So what we're doing is in our building department, we have an employee that will be leaving us, and she will be taking a lot of institutional knowledge with her. We're sad to lose her, but we're going to have to move some people around between planning and building in order to get somebody floodplain certified to work with both of those departments. And this will most likely result in us filling an entry-level tech position, but we don't exactly know what that's going to look like at this time, and so we're just letting you know that something has to happen here, and it will most likely result in another position. Dental program funding. This is not a current program that the board supports, but the health department has reached out to me and they have requested support in being able to provide salary for a dentist. They are having a very difficult time right now because private practice for dentistry is much more lucrative than working for your state health department. In addition to salary for a dentist, they also serve many clients that are on a sliding income scale, as well as zero fee-for-service clients, and they have provided about 11,000 services to over 1,000 clients in the last calendar year. They also have programs at the school where they go and they work with the kids there, and a lot of them are uninsured as well. And so I would like to point out here also that the county currently provides funding to the health department to the tune of $55,000 a year. That's the local contribution that we give them, and that has been the same since 2011, 2012. So this is the first time that they've reached out to me to ask for additional funding. And Tanya is here as well, so I think if we get wrapped up, if there's any questions, we might be able to speak with her. Addition, we talked about earlier about we've identified that need in the eastern portion of the county to put an engine company there. So that would be 9 new personnel. And so that's 3 personnel per shift on the engine, as well as the law enforcement, 2 dispatchers and bailiffs that we mentioned earlier. When we are talking about this, y'all please stop Kelly if you have any questions about what she's covering. And we would like to get some feedback as far as what your feelings are about any of these changes that she's talking about.
Okay, so currently Fire Rescue has a combined operating budget of just over $6 million, and we've been on a growth trajectory over the last several years. Factors contributing to that growth include both planned and unplanned growth in personnel and expenses. While we operate Fire Rescue as a single department, we have to maintain separate budgets. Funding for the fire operations comes from the MSBU, the annual fire assessment, and funding for EMS comes from the general fund. We do get some revenue in from ambulance billings, but for the most part, the funding comes straight from the general fund. We have to maintain the separate budgets because the MSBU funds are restricted for fire protection only. We can only use it for that purposes. So the MSBU side is facing several challenges in fiscal year 23-24. The first one being that expenses are outpacing revenue. Story's the same all over. In July 21, we conducted a rate study for the MSBU, and the board approved a restructuring of that fire assessment. The restructuring increased gross revenue to $2.7 million. It updated the apportionment, how much we charge each different property type for fire protection, and it established a capital fund within the MSBU. And it provided a 23% budget increase to the fire operations. At that time, staff recommended a revenue growth trajectory of 3% year over year based on 5-year average budget projections. Unfortunately, those projections did not stand the test of time. In the 2 years since the study, our operational expenses have increased 44%, while revenue has increased just 27%. This is mostly because of labor costs. Labor costs make up well over half of our operating budget, and while we have increased actual staffing by 17% in terms of physical personnel, our personnel costs have increased by 32%. This added expense was due to the countywide pay adjustments. That study came in after we did our MSBU study. We had a Medicaid minimum wage mandate last year. We had to increase our entry-level personnel to $15 an hour. And we had increased benefits costs last year, pretty substantial, but the county chose to absorb those costs rather than pass them on to employees. If we continue on this track, we anticipate a budget gap of nearly $600,000 next year, and that also puts the fund balance in pretty bad shape. One more. The second challenge is that the MSBU is currently not paying its fair share of fire rescue personnel costs, which means that the general fund is having to pick up those costs. We talked about the MSBU funds being restricted, so we have to justify how we allocate all of our expenses. Most expenses, it's easy to do if it's fire hose that it pays for by the MSBU. If it's bandages, the general fund pays for those. But because our personnel are dual certified, it's more difficult to parse that out. Currently, our dual certified employees are paid 38% from the MSBU and 62% from the general fund. The allocation is based on a time study that we did in 2016 where employees tracked their activities over several months, nearly a year. The study determined that as a whole, staff spent 38% of their time performing fire-related activities and 62% of their time performing EMS-related activities. So that became our allocation. At that time, we operated with 11 personnel on shift per day. 8 were assigned to ambulances, and 2 were assigned to a single fire engine. Fast forward to today, our ratio of EMS to fire personnel has shifted. We have now the 8 same personnel assigned to ambulances, but we've increased the number of fire personnel. So now fire assignments make up 40% of our daily staffing, where before they only made up 18%. we now have more fire personnel doing more fire-related activities. So if we did that time study again, the allocation would turn out very different. What we need is an allocation method that is a little more flexible. We don't want to do a year-long time study again. So what we're recommending is that we allocate personnel costs based on your daily assignment. When an employee is on an engine, 100% of the calls that they respond to are considered fire calls. Even if they go to a medical call, it's still considered first response, which is allowable fire activity under the MSBU. But if you're on an ambulance, our call data shows that 83% of your calls will be medical calls, but 17% will be fire calls. And that's because when we have a fire, we send all of our units, all available ambulances. So that happens 17% of the time that an ambulance will actually go to a fire call. Our plan, which we have talked with the clerk's office about, would track each employee's daily assignment via their payroll timesheet. And when they're assigned to an engine, they would be paid 100% from the MSBU. When they're assigned to an ambulance, they would be paid 17% from the MSBU and 83% from the general fund. And this method of real-time allocation provides us flexibility as we grow, and it ensures that the MSBU is being utilized correctly for personnel costs. And our third major challenge is providing adequate fire coverage. Fire rescue has divided the county into 3 coverage zones, each served by a manned station. Station 1 serves Crawfordville proper, that has the highest population density and the most commercial development. And there are approximately 8,400 addresses located within Zone 1 that Crawfordville is first response to. Station 2 is in MedArt, and that serves about 5,200 addresses, and they cover Shell Point all the way around the coast and up to Spring Creek. But Station 3 serves the entire eastern portion of the county. There are 4,230 addresses in Zone 3, and we have several vulnerabilities in this zone, including the Woodville Highway and Highway 98 traffic corridors, the communities of St. Marks, Newport, all the way up to Bob Miller, over to Wakulla Springs. And we have critical infrastructure there, such as the St. Marks power plant and the City of Tallahassee Utilities Generating Station. Zone 3 currently has just 1 rescue unit on duty. They don't have an engine company. When we receive a call in that zone, Engine 1 or Engine 2 has to respond from Crawfordville or MedArt. So this means that response times in that zone are upwards of 15 minutes. And in addition, we've now diverted the engine from Crawfordville, leaving our main population center unprotected. So those are our 3 challenges. The way we're proposing to meet these challenges is to increase revenue from the MSBU, and we've prepared several options to look at. We talked about the GSG study that we conducted in 21, and that study provided the formula to correctly apportion fire protection costs and calculate rates by property type. That formula set up the capital fund, and that represents 12% of revenue coming in. We established that funding source in response to the increased pressure on the 1-cent sales tax public safety fund. Previously, that 1-cent sales tax had been used for capital expenditures and fire, but due to many factors, that went away. So we stood up our own capital funding source within the MSBU. So 88% of the revenue that comes in funds operations, and 12% goes in a piggy bank for capital. Option 1 is to increase the MSBU only enough to fund status quo operations and close the budget gap. This does not address the personnel cost allocation or provide funding to add fire coverage in Zone 3. The status quo budget projection for fiscal year 23-24 is just under $3 million, and that represents a 4% increase over fiscal year 22-23. In this scenario, preliminary estimates would put the MSBU gross revenues at $3.5 million, which results in an annual rate of $172 per household, which is an increase of $18 a year over the current rate of $154. Option 2 would be to increase the MSBU to close the budget gap and fund reallocation of fire and EMS personnel costs. This reallocation results in a 30% increase to the fire operations budget, but it also results in nearly $600,000 reduction in the EMS operating budget. As it stands today, the general fund is heavily subsidizing fire personnel costs, and we suggest that we fix that imbalance. In this scenario, the MSBU gross revenues would be increased to $4.4 million, and this would result in an annual rate of $216 per household. And finally, option 3 is to increase the MSBU to close the budget gap, reallocate personnel expenses, and add an engine company at Station 3. This would involve hiring 9 new full-time personnel firefighters, that's 3 per shift, and would require an operational budget of almost $4.4 million. The addition of the 3rd engine company has long been part of Fire Rescue's operational plan. It's just now the budget impact is greater than we previously anticipated. In this scenario, MSBU gross revenues would be increased to $5.2 million, and that would result in an annual rate of $256 per household.
And it's key to understand that the 3rd engine over there is part of our master plan. If you remember, we had a 5-year master plan, and it was all a part of this. So we've grown the way we thought we would in the EMS and fire, and this is just the other part of our plan. So it's nothing. It's calculated move.
Does any commissioner have any questions for Louis or Kelly before we move on?
Good.
All right.
I have one question. That's probably going to turn into another question. I'll talk to Kelly, Louie. I'm just kidding. Anybody can answer it. I made my supplemental notes today, right now, and earlier. Can you just run through with regard to the time study that took too long to do, so the numbers weren't correct, or they were correct at the time, but when we needed to refer back to them, they weren't correct anymore. Can you just walk me through the 83% and the 17% when they start turning in actual calls? Can you do that for me simply, or try to?
Yes.
Okay.
So, well, like we said, when you're on an engine, everything you do is considered fire protection.
So that's 100% right off the board.
100% right off
Okay.
the board, if you're on a fire engine. But if you're on an ambulance, for every 100 calls you respond to, 83 of those will be routine EMS calls, medical transports, take my blood pressure, whatever it is. But 17 out of those 100 calls, you'll go to a fire call. So you are, even though you're assigned to an ambulance and you're an EMS employee for that day by assignment, you're actually doing fire-related activity. You're responding to fire calls. And that's because we don't have enough firefighters to work a structure fire. We have to bring in all of our units. So ambulances, everybody comes to that fire when we have one. We call out all available units.
And may I have one more? Sure. So I'll ask Louie this question, even though you can answer. Is it a misconception that when an engine leaves the station, there does not have to be a fire? An engine can leave the station for a potential fire, a car wreck, any...
We get a call for service, we have to go.
Exactly,
So
okay.
yeah, that's, you can see that.
The 100% applies to when the red engine leaves the station. Thank you.
If you're trapped in your car.
I know what color it is.
Trapped in your car and you need the jaws of life, you need a fire engine.
Actually, we try to send 2 in case one set goes.
Exactly.
There's a lot of confusion about fires and response with the charges.
So I was looking at the fire specifically today. I was working on our spreadsheet. We keep a spreadsheet on the types of fire calls that we go to. Now, this does not include car wrecks. The first quarter, we were up by 30 calls already this year. So you're talking about our call volume potentially 100 calls plus, and that's just for structural and wildland firefighting.
So, when you come to the next meeting, could you bring the change in call volume
Absolutely.
that as a percentage?
Absolutely. No, and I encourage you guys, please call us if you have questions. Kelly, thank you for doing everything.
I do have, hey, Louis, do have a question. I got a question too, but go ahead. So, do we have it in here somewhere, the proposal for the 9-person engine company to be added in zone 3? What is the cost of that alone? And I see it all in option 3. Do we have a cost of what that would cost just for that piece of it?
So the increase on the MSBU is the staffing piece. Kelly?
It's all in personnel costs. It's about $750,000 a year.
Okay.
New personnel, pay, benefits, equipping them for service, all in. And that's the difference between option 2 and option 3 within the budget.
Okay.
That's the recurring charge, but that wasn't about the 1.2 that me and you discussed, the startup cost, right?
So we have an engine at that station. We wouldn't have to buy a new engine per se to say we had those 9 people today. I have a truck that they can be on today. The legislative funding that we were speaking of and the 1.2 for the new engine, that really has nothing to do with the staffing. We need that new engine anyways because of our fleet staging, which we're going to put that together for you guys by the next meeting as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's the capital component, we've gotta justify it, because if we do take the third option, that 12% was a pretty good number. We need to quantify that because that number could be too high. And so we could not come back to y'all and say, hey, this number needs to lower, because you don't want to overfund. And we want to be able to accurately say based on where we are, because we've done a lot of work and gotten our equipment where it is, and we just need to make sure we hit the numbers that we need to based on that equipment.
If we did the option 3, I can't quite see, the capital component, the 12% would be, let's say,
You can look right there to your left.
604.
$600,000 a year, which we would be banking in that capital component.
And that's, I think that's overriding the engine a little bit, but we need to, pardon the pun, but we need to verify that and make sure what budget number do we really need to have there. And then if that number goes down, then these are all preliminary numbers anyway, and we would work all that in.
Yeah, that was kind of what I was wondering, is if we're adding $102 for just 9 personnel, I mean, if that's all personnel costs, it seemed like that would be a large cost. So I don't know. So I know it's preliminary when we're getting to that. You already answered mine when you. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis and Kelly. I appreciate it. Commissioners, I think this just goes to all our departments. We track everything because there's no way you can manage a department or anything unless you know your numbers. What do you do? And because what gets measured gets done. And if you don't understand those things, how in the world can you get things done? So I appreciate the professionalism and thank you.
So I wanted to present a snapshot of our millage rates over the last 10 years. Those of you that were here in 15-16 may remember that we identified at that point that we were sitting on a rather large surplus than was necessary. Our fund balance policy is 25% to 33%, so that's 3 to 4 months of operating expenses in any operating fund. When we identified that, we dropped our millage rate, and then we dropped it again. What David and I strive to do is to not be jumpy with the millage rate. And so at this point today, I don't think we're prepared to tell you what we think at the second workshop that the millage rate is going to be. But like I said, we don't want to drop down to 7.75 and then turn around the following year and need to go to 9. And so we try to keep this as steady as we can. And it really is a balance between, what's the impact on your fund balance? Are you getting too much money? Are you spending down your cash? And factor in that we're always playing catch up with these revenues. So what's being constructed today isn't on the roll until next year's budget talks, and so it really is a lot of analysis that goes into when we recommend a budget to you in July, we'll have this finalized. So several of the outstanding issues that we have right now, the biggest one being our taxable value to be certified by our property appraiser. July 1st falls on a Saturday this year, so I assume the 29th or 30th will have that actual number. We have seen the highest increase in taxable values last year that we've ever had in the last 11 years since we've been here. So right now we're using an estimate of 17%, and so we're aware that there was a revised estimate sent out, and we're looking at that as well. But there's a lot of factors still right now outstanding until we can, emphatically say this is the millage rate that will work for us. In addition to that, we're also looking at the impact to the general fund from some of our transfers in between funds. So we cost allocate each one of our operating funds, and that means we have somebody come in every several years. He pulls together all of our financials, the cost of our insurances and things like that, how many checks we run, all kinds of information, and he provides us back with a report that says this fund should be paying X amount of dollars to the general fund. So the general fund looks at those transfers in as legitimate revenue. And when we have funds that start to get in trouble, such as our MSBU fund, we're getting a little worried, we cannot make that transfer out of the MSBU and into the general fund. So not only do we now have a fund that's kind of starting to indicate that there are some issues, but we now have just lost revenue that was budgeted in our general fund as well. So every fund should be able to stand on its own. It should be able to live within the revenue that it's collected. And when that doesn't happen, that indicates to us that we need to look at it, and we need to do one of those options I mentioned at the beginning. We need to raise our revenue somehow, or we need to cut our expenses. And so our two funds that cause a little bit of concern right now is just our MSBU fund and our road fund. The road fund is a little different situation that is funded off the gas tax. It's a super flat tax. It's collected all over the state of Florida. When it goes up and when things are really busy, it doesn't really mean that much more revenue to the county. But on the other side, when things get bad and people stop driving, it doesn't really hurt us that much either. So it's extremely flat. We do have some additional local option pennies available that we could levy at some point. And so David and I will look at that as if that's something that we want to bring forward and recommend that we implement.
You're also seeing that road fund, revenue from that is also a result in all electric cars, as they do not pay a gas tax. So as more and more electric cars get on the road, they're basically riding for free. They're not paying for their fair share.
The good news about the road and gas tax is it funds a lot of Department of Transportation for the state. And so when they start struggling, then something will happen. So we share that same problem with every other county, plus a large state agency. And so, there could be some future offset from the legislature for the electric car reduction. We don't know. But when it impacts DOT, it gets people's attention. So it's not a terrible problem right now. It's just something that we're watching to make sure we don't want to let that fund become in a situation where it's in trouble.
I could real quick also, I'll go flip back to that. The increase in value, that as we talk, that value is going to be higher, that increase. And I want to thank Ed and his crew at the property appraiser's office. Last year I hammered them a little bit, but this year I'm gonna praise them. What they have done is they've corrected a lot of stuff, and that should have been corrected a long time ago. And now we're getting more. They're properly appraising properties, commercial facilities, etc., to where you're going to see the effect hopefully in our next meeting, to where for everyone is fairly everybody pays the same. No favors are given. All of a sudden, things get better for everyone. So I think you're going to see that. That'll be demonstrated if everything plays out right. But I want to thank them and the hard work because they have worked their butts off to get there. And but he really has done a statesman type job. He ignored the politics of it, and he's really done a good job on that.
Even as recently as 15, 16, and 16, 17, we were seeing increases year over year of 2%, 3%, 4%. And so, and here we are today talking about a potential 19 to 32% increase. And so that right there tells you a lot about the situation. And David and I feel like, there was the potential back then at that time to have a lower millage rate then if the valuations would have been applied appropriately. So, all right, this is the state of our revenue stabilization fund. And we talked at the very beginning about our burn, and this is one of the funds that we intentionally burned some funds down out of. We were started the beginning of this year sitting on about $10.4 million in this fund. We have about just under $10 million of that, or $8 million, committed to projects, and that would be our Phase 1A collection system, our golf course, our match for a radio system, and then another match for a Phase 2 treatment system. So these are either required grant matches or they're a grant we received and we put budget estimates in some time ago. Then we get the grant agreement, then we actually bid them out. And at today's prices, we have a gap between that grant funding and what the project actually costs. So we're using this revenue stabilization funding to make up that gap. I'm projecting at the end of next fiscal year, the one we're budgeting for now, that we'll have about $1 million in this fund. We are crediting any interest that we earned on our $30 million line of credit, so we're investing that money, and any interest earned goes back to this revenue stabilization fund to offset the interest payment for that $30 million note. So we think we might actually make a tiny bit of money there, $20,000, but it does offset it. Do we have any elected officers that want to speak before we go any further?
Don't y'all rush the podium.
Do y'all have any elected officers that you want to speak to?
Anyone? Questions, comments from the board?
So, Sheriff's Office, you're gonna get 9 new officers?
Yes, Sheriff Miller has requested some more positions. I'll talk about the law enforcement positions first. So those 6 would be, 2 would be detectives. I don't believe he's asked for detectives in several years. Caseload is up, it's reminiscent of everything else. Call volume is up. The 4 law enforcement positions would all be each put on road patrol. The focus there would be to kind of bring back more of an expert traffic unit, not a traffic unit, so to say. We don't like to label that, but traffic calls are really up. The beaches, boat ramps, a lot of that's really gotten very, very active. So we're trying to manage that, and we're thinking one way we might be able to do that is just strengthen road patrol. That's the backbone of the agency. So, and I'll just say this. We try real hard to manage everything that comes our way, and lately it seems that everybody that we have is almost a utility guy or girl. We call straight from admin. There'll be times that in the office me and 1 or 2 other people may be there that's certified. So people are coming out and they're doing a host of things because we're just a little short. So those law enforcement positions would be used like that. The dispatchers, we have the emergency medical dispatch we're putting in place that's by statute. So the hope there would be to train everybody, because you have to have somebody available on every shift. And so we need to do some training, and then like all of our other departments and everyone else's, we're a little short-handed. We just felt that 2 communications officers would catch us up to the times where we could get trained up and staffed up in the case that we lose people. We lose, employees like everyone else. So we're just trying to keep up with the times and the service calls. The other position was a bailiff. Again, we had a conversation earlier today, Jan, myself, and the sheriff, and there's always somebody running down there putting on a bailiff's hat, whether they're, whatever job they're doing, it's just like a priority. So we're just, highest priority, we kind of, is where we put our extra help, or we take away from a lower priority. So these positions, we feel like would kind of make us whole for now. Any questions about any of them?
On the 2 medical dispatchers, that means that they can obviously walk somebody through a medical emergency.
Yes. So statute
And
says you got to have somebody.
Exactly.
So we're going to train everybody, but when that call comes, you can't leave that call. So that communications officer has to completely stop doing what they're doing until that is finished. So we anticipate that that just takes a person out of play, and that's what we're trying to prepare for.
Billy, as far as you said, you don't want to label that as traffic, I understand that. But would these guys be the ones we send in the neighborhoods where we're constantly getting the speeding, the aggressive driving through the neighborhoods, that we can't put traffic calming devices because it's a thoroughfare? Is that the kind of where you're going with this?
So what we would try to do is, and you remember one time we had a traffic unit, it was extremely proactive, and we may never see that again. But yeah, these what we want to do, just like the emergency dispatchers, we want everybody to be able to do whatever needs to be done, but we want to dedicate a person on shift who could be proactive in traffic assignments, traffic enforcement. What we have now is we get these traffic complaints and we try to push them out, but it's a reactive. What we would hope to do is have enough manpower to anticipate where the trouble is going to be and go ahead and head it off, and then have someone around the clock who could respond to a traffic complaint, whether it be the old 15 Echo where you go to a neighborhood and you're looking for this bandit vehicle, or it's a construction site that people are just wearing us out at. So just give us a little more depth. Thank you. Yep.
So last time you got an increase in staff, you showed us your call volumes and how under
Yes.
you were because of call volumes.
Apologize for that.
I would like to see that again.
Yes, sir. Not a problem.
Yeah, one of the things that, about the 2 detectives that me and Billy had talked about, each detective has got over 100 plus cases. And I can tell you from working CID, you can't work 100 cases fairly. You can't do it. It's impossible. Anybody tells you any other thing, they're, so I understand the 2 detectives and, for it. And now obviously the dispatchers, those are the 2 things that I really get. I told Billy before, we don't have a K-9 down here. And I know that, I don't know if the sheriff had decided on that. We definitely need a K-9. I mean, every Calhoun's got one, Liberty's got one, and their population, Franklin's got them, and we're 3 times as big as they are. If you need a K-9 right now, you got to call Leon or you got to call there. So we really need to start taking.
Yeah, we usually call the prison, and they're a big help. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time.
So obviously the missing piece of information is what our overall value is going to be and our revenue, and Ed gave us hope that with the email we got this week, and hopefully that comes about, and that's going to help us solve a lot of problems, I would think.
Yeah, and you'll notice that we only talked about our general fund and our MSBU fund because we foresee an issue there. So most of our other operating funds, I don't want to say are on autopilot because I look at the ledgers and I look at the revenue expense reports, but these are the things that we're bringing to you because we see there is a potential for concern or because we're just letting you know where we are. But yeah, the biggest thing right now that we're missing is that certification of values. And also that reduction on the general fund of those EMS wages. I mean, that $600,000 savings in the general fund, that's a potential game changer. And so we'd like to get what your thoughts are on these options. I know we've met with you all ahead of time. If you need some time to, reach out to us one by one later on after you've thought about it. But we need that direction in order to know what kind of budget to recommend to you at our second workshop in July.
So that would hinge upon an increase to the MSBU in order to make that possible.
Yes, and we have, these numbers are very preliminary, but it would be an increase. We just don't know exactly what that number would be. But fairly allocating legitimate expenses to each fund, we've always done that, and we've always said that's what needs to happen. Every fund should be able to support itself. The general fund is there to subsidize a fund temporarily if there's a problem, so we can make a plan and fix it. But the amount that we appear to be subsidizing the MSBU for years and years and years, again, goes back to millage rate. We could have had, a lower millage rate then because we're not allocating these expenses to these funds that they should be paying for.
And this is how once we got this new information, that's what we brought it forward. But if you notice, throughout the years, we have fixed funds, and meaning every fund needs to operate on its own, and it needs to live and die by itself. And that's what this does. It shifts that over and says, okay, now MSBU, here's what you really cost, because it does no good for anybody to, it's like I tell my folks, when your electric budget runs out, don't start charging your electric accounts over the telephone. Keep charging to your electric, and then we'll make some shifts, but it doesn't do anybody any good to keep paying. That's right. It does no good at all. Just start shuffling. That's poor management. So anyway, that's what this does. This fixes this fund, and as far as I know, this would be the last one.
Mr. Chairman, just for informational purposes, the preliminary rate resolution for your assessment programs, which includes fire, which was the topic of discussion today, needs to be adopted at your July 17th meeting in order to meet the trim schedule. That's your only option before that trim deadline, which the property appraiser needs that by August 1st. And so if there is a desire to change your assessment rates and pursue one of these other options that were presented today, or a hybrid of them, or pieces of them, we do need direction fairly soon. The agenda deadline for that July 17th meeting is July 7th.
When's our next meeting after the roll is going to be published on July 1st?
We don't have one.
Yeah, just that one meeting in July, which is the 17th.
Okay.
So you could, if you had direction, we could include rates and you could change them at that meeting, certainly. Also, those are, as you know, the preliminary rates, so it sort of sets your ceiling. You can come down from it, but you can't go up.
Mr. Chair, may I ask Brandy a question? So this is let me just make sure that I have this correct with regard to, I see that the one is $1 a month-ish a year, and number 2 is $5 a month-ish a year. Number 3 is $10 a month-ish a year. We got here because all of the money was being dumped into one bucket. So now we are separating the cups so that they can always continually pay for themselves based on which cup they are in. Is that correct?
In a roundabout nutshell way, yes. I
Okay.
think where you're going. Yes, we got here because, and we have brought this MSBU forward for rate increases before, and I was actually just looking at the budget over the years, and it was as recent as 17-18 that we had to transfer over $200,000 from our revenue stabilization fund to this MSBU fund. So we have brought this forward, and I think that because this comes with a significant savings to the general fund at this time, if we're able to reallocate those personnel expenses, it makes it more palatable for you, but we also want to make sure we're providing all of our citizens adequate fire coverage, because as I understand from Louis right now, they are not able to do that at times, especially if you're in that eastern portion of the county, and it's over 4,000 homes, structures, I should say. They're not all homes, but there are 4,000 structures in there.
And I know that this is, the way that things usually don't work. When you set something, it continues to increase every year. However, there is a possibility that these numbers, while we know this is what we need, these are not hypothetical. This is, we are playing catch up and we need to catch up.
Right, and we don't ever want to commit to you that this rate is never going to go up again.
Well, of course.
It would be $256 in the perpetuity, because that's not realistic. Typically, all of our assessments, we like to impose a CPI, a reasonable CPI on them each year. You guys set forth that for the sewer rates, and they go up each year with that CPI. So these are just the mechanisms that we use to make sure our funds are stable and healthy, like David said, that they live within their means. We know FRS is going to go up every single year. For now, the board has generously continued to absorb the CHP increase for our employees, but we know that cost is going to go up each year. We never know what fuel is going to do, and so, there's inherent increases in all of these operating funds every year. So you have to have, you can have your growth, but you calculate that, how much does growth affect this versus a CPI, and then you can kind of meet them in the middle, so you have adequate revenue year over year to cover those expenses that you know are going to go up each year.
And also a note on option 3 and adding the fire company. This was part of our plan. The reason I say it was part of our overall plan was we saw with the what's the word I'm looking for, with volunteerism drying up, and it's dried up now. Used to be able to cover these areas with volunteers. That's no longer a possibility. That's over. So now you're seeing the adjustment. If you want to cover folks, we have to pay for it now. So that's the reason for this, and it wouldn't matter if we had half the people that we've got in the county today. What would happen? We'd be making the same recommendation, same one, and then the problem would be is we would have fewer people to spread it over. So that has nothing to do with growth. That has purely to do with volunteerism went away, and we're looking at how can we help protect the citizens on the eastern, whether it's 2,000, 4,000, or 6,000. We have to protect those citizens.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it holds true with the sheriff's department as well.
Right.
Even if our population was in half, we're not over-covered anywhere.
Exactly.
We don't have too many people, too many officers or firefighters or EMS workers out there, so.
And the good news is we've got more places to spread that, so it's a lower number, but,
All you gotta do is look at the traffic.
that's fine.
I mean, we're
Traffic is heading
and it's
south.
all going south, and a lot of it is going through the county.
That's right.
But they still have wrecks in the county. So you need direction. I'll start it off. I support, let's write the MSBU fund. I definitely support that. Hopefully, we can do it at a time where we can have an offset to our ad valorem. I know we don't know those numbers, but that's going to make it a whole lot easier, on the pocketbook for everyone out there. And so, but we always need to keep that goal of making every fund self-supportive as much as we can.
Now, are you in favor of the third engine company as well? Or you just,
I think we need that.
Well, the numbers are there.
Yeah. And we've got a fire station there with a fire truck there and no people.
Nobody drive it.
Yeah.
and that is ultimately our goal, is to come back with a recommendation that does, with a millage rate that does offset, if not all of it, the majority of it, so that they can see savings on their property's tax side and the special assessment increases. Absolutely the goal.
Yeah. Okay.
And I agree with,
I agree.
what Ralph said is that, obviously, hopefully with being able to do the MSBU fund, which it actually winds up being $8.05 a month, if it wound up being 02, it might be 85, it might be 55, Obviously, I like to wait and see, well, we're going to have to until we find out exactly when Ed comes back with the numbers, and that will pretty much tell us exactly where we need to be. I mean, I looked at his numbers and stuff, you talked today, so, that don't tell me a whole lot until we get a definite answer where we're going to be at, so I just...
Yeah, and I understand this time of year for us just as much as for him, or him even more, he's compiling every day. We're getting revised requests every day. One just came in to me through email at 3:00 today, and so everything is very much a moving target right now, but absolutely the goal is to have an offset in the millage rate.
If you're making a motion for that.
I don't think we need a motion, do we?
No, okay.
'Cause we don't have anything really to pin down at this point.
Yeah.
I just want to kind of know our mindset of where we want to head.
I'm with you on, option number 3, as far as cleaning up things. And the most important thing is that while we're talking about this today, and this is what we're going with today, every single thing we're talking about is fluid, but if that is what is going to make things clear, that's where I am.
Well, as I understand it, there's a 15-minute response time for fire in the eastern part of the county. That's just too long. By then, the fire's consumed the house.
Especially if you're trapped in a vehicle. I'm good with option 3. I would prefer reinstituting the 500 kilowatt hour exemption on our PST tax before, and then if we still have some, then reduce the millage.
I'll get those calculations and David and I will look at them, and I wanted to let you know that on July 14th, I'll send out a proposed budget to you electronically. Anybody that wants a hard copy, let me know. And then primarily our second workshop, because that's the point of the year where we, commissioners, this is your budget. And then I think I'm going to try a little different formatting this year where you're not bored to death with every individual line item. So I'm going to list you out some things to make it easier for you. Like, I'm not going to pick on the health department, but they've requested this. This is what we're currently funding now. They've requested this. And then at that point, it's your budget. You will need to tell David and I, no, take that out, or whatever. We'll have to do that. Now, we'll still review cash balances. We'll update actuals to kind of, tweak our projections as we get to the end of the year. But any line item changes from that point forward, they'll come to you either in a workshop or the public hearing, and we'll actually talk about them.
And I didn't see where the senior citizen, what was the increase on that? I missed that.
The increase on that, so the current, let me get back to that tab.
77.
And I don't want to throw them under the bus because I didn't see anybody here from there. But in the current fiscal year, we're funding them $105,000. They have requested $254,000 for next fiscal year. They would like to change the manner in which their fuel is calculated, and so they no longer want us to transfer them the fuel money. They just want us to hold it because it runs through our fuel island and do it by journal entry, so for cash flow purposes. But it's included as a cost of the senior center. And I've spoken with them, and they had an issue with some salaries that were being funded with a non-recurring funding source, and so that is the justification for the large increase, is the drivers for the transportation system. And I think everybody is aware that the county is obligated to provide those transportation services in one form or fashion. And so right now, we're meeting that requirement by the senior center doing it. And so when I get the finalized request, David and I will look at it and see if we need to talk about it. We definitely need to talk about it at the second workshop, so.
I think we need a hardline cost on that too, because if they weren't doing it, we would have to do it.
Exactly.
And so we need to know, what is that pot of money? How much would that cost if we had to take it?
Well, and I can assure you that the Transportation Disadvantage Board and all of the CTCs and all of those magic things that we are statutorily required to do, just as a city commissioner, I have the pleasure of being on all of those boards. So it is a big deal with regard to, that would be my request, Randy, is that we take a big picture look, overview, like really big, and break these things down to, this is our requirement for this county, and let's go a little bit backwards to see where we are.
I understand. $201,000 of that request of the total amount is just for the transportation component. The meal component is not changing, and that's $52,000 a year. So the majority of that request is the transportation.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, I think the primary thing is to make sure that, they're not subsidizing taxpayers, things that we're required to do. We need to know what
That's exactly right.
is.
Well, I've requested some additional documentation from them as well, and I'm waiting to see that, and so then David and I can take a look at it.
Brandy, what about is there a way for you to set a fund up, this money that the governor's given law enforcement and first responders all over the state, our guys, is there a way for you to set up a fund, and it don't have to be all of it, but where we add money into that fund, because let's just say he's running for president, he gets elected president, the following year, usually, that may fall away, and then we're not hit with this big gap that we've got to absorb. But
I think you're referring to the fiscally constrained money we're getting for the sheriff's office. Right
Yeah.
now, what we're doing is it gets transferred to the sheriff, and then anything of their budget that they don't spend each year gets returned to the board, but it stays in their fund, so they have their own standalone fund.
Well, and like I say, it don't have to be all of it, but I don't want us to get hit with, oh Lord, we're not getting that money no more.
That's what and that's what their fund balance and their fund is for. If something like that happens, it gives time to make adjustments, what do we need to do, how do we get out of this? And
I just don't want us to get hit with a big you know what I mean?
Well, that's the reason we set each individual constitutional up with their fund.
Okay.
To have that cushion, they have to manage their own business and have that cushion, because this is setting up just like ice.
That's where I don't want to go.
Set the board,
I don't want to go there.
everything's just lining up just
Well, I can remember sitting in here too, when board meetings and Sheriff Hawkins and
everybody's the same.
yeah, don't count on this.
That's right. So that's what I'm saying. They got to be careful as well to say, well, let's not overhead this engine.
Gotcha.
And I think that money was designated to supplement salary, not new hires, not admin personnel, correct?
Yes, sir.
That's correct.
Okay, I just didn't want us to get caught with a
But
pants.
still, it's the same difference, because that's,
That's what I remember is ice. Yeah.
that's right. But,
That was not a good time.
but as you know, administrations change, just like that in life. That's a prime example. Also, just to let you know, as y'all know, what Brandy and I are really good at is taking all the emotions out of budgets. And we go down to pure hardcore math. So what we'll present you is a hardcore, here's the lowest we can make the millage rate, here's what we can do here, here's what we can do there. We got to make sure we're putting enough money away for the future. We got to bring our fund balance up. We will make sure to try to get all those things in there, but when we bring it to you, just understand we've done the math, and that's what we do every year. And
We thank you.
And we're happy to walk through the math with you, if you guys want to torture yourselves a little bit and come in the conference room with us while we're throwing
Sounds fun.
dry erase markers at each other. Come on.
You've already fried my brain, so we're.
we'll do it together. That's what I call it, walking through the forest.
Nice. Very good.
I have one more question for Brandy, if I may, sir.
Yes.
Do we have a line item for 5 new chairs in your fund chance? Does that come from the general fund?
Hold on.
That's Jessica. Jessica said no.
Jessica said no, we're not allowed to do it. She needs a new chair too. Okay, good. All right, 6 new chairs.
Very good. So high level, so we'll see maybe the actual budget starting back in the next meeting.
Yes, it's not the next June meeting, the July meeting, but yeah, we may have something else to talk to you guys about then. We're gonna nail down our MSBU numbers, we're gonna nail down the exact amount of the EMS wages, we're gonna nail all that down between now and the next meeting, and then certainly by the July meeting, because then the budget becomes yours at that point.
Very good. I know it's early, but I'll just throw this out. I know we've got this great concept plan of what's going in at the community center, and we've been stepping that direction. And I know we added the sand softball courts at the rec park, so great things are happening. We'd like to see if we can squeeze it. Maybe a good time to work on that splash pad at the community center.
Calhoun County's got one of those.
Michelle is working on that right now.
Yep. Work on it. We know it's good. Yeah.
But yes, you're right. That, and we plan that to be the next phase of Hudson Park, so, yeah.
And we really need to.
It's in the master plan, the next phase of Hudson. If Hudson will ever, if we'll ever get it back into the park. I'm not sure we'll ever get back into the park, but maybe we will one day.
Very good. All right, we've got about 20 minutes. Anybody else have anything from the public, constitutionals, anyone?
Do you have any questions for us at all?
Anyone? Keep doing what you're doing. Yeah, I mean, I know we'll have more as we get closer and more details, but, let us know how we can help. All right. If not, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All right, we'll stand adjourned. Board meeting will start at 5 p.m.
Yeah, Calhoun County's got one.
Oh!